Most guys think, well, if I buy her flowers, or if I just reassure her that I'm going to be different, or if I whatever we do behaviorally, it doesn't really move the needle that much. And so if you want to get her to open her heart back up, we have to be able to speak into that fear, and we have to be able to be the kind of person when we're around her that makes her feel less afraid.
Hello, welcome back to Like-Minded Servants with me, Cecil Graves, a podcast for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to get better every day. We're back with Mr. Quentin Hafner, the author of Black Belt Husband. We finished up on our last episode talking about some questions that are just super impactful. So if you're a husband, if you're listening to this one and you haven't listened to the previous episode, why don't you pause it and go back to episode 1 of season 2 and give that a listen so you can understand our flow into today. All right, well, let's just jump right back into questions, Quentin. Our first question today is, tell us, as men, the questions the other day, I think, were a little more not G, but more general, I guess you'd say. These are more specific for a lot of struggles men have that they're probably afraid to ask, probably don't know who to ask, don't have anybody to ask, and definitely wouldn't ask their wife these questions. But tell us, as men, how we can meet our needs and how do we ask for or communicate that with our wives?
The first thing that jumps out at me in answering that question is, do we even know that we have needs? Do we even know what our needs are? And I know that might seem like maybe a silly question, but in my experience, and even not just as a professional, but even my personal life, if you would have asked me at 25, what are your needs, Quentin? I would have looked at you cross-eyed like, what are you talking about? Okay. So it's a great question. And so I think the starting place in that question is, what what are my needs? Am I aware of my needs? And then the second part of that question is, how do I communicate that to people in my life to be able to satiate or get my needs met? When most guys, and I don't know if you meant this by the question, Cecil, but when I hear most guys say I don't get my needs met, they're typically talking about sex.
Mm.
Okay. And if for anybody who's listening to this, sex is a very important need, very, very important need. And so we do want to make sure that we know how to get our sexual needs met. But here's the problem with thinking about it that way. Okay. Or thinking about, or not, here's the problem with not understanding what our other needs are and only connecting to what our sexual needs are. If we don't know what our other needs are, all of our needs will feel like sexual needs.
Mm.
Okay. And so we become kind of like one trick ponies in the sense of like I'm trying to fill my heart through sex, and it's the wrong angle. Okay. And as I say that, I also just want to be really clear that your sexual needs are very important. So I'm not dismissing that or saying that's not important. Yes, it's very important. But the best analogy is like, if you're really hungry and I offered you Gatorade, it's not going to hit. Okay. But thirst is also a very important need. And so is, and hunger is an important need to get met, but they're very different. Giving food to someone who's really thirsty, it won't matter.
Mm.
Okay. And so we want to be more sophisticated in understanding, what are our needs? What are our needs? And typically, I won't go into like a lot of detail around this, but there's 4 big buckets of relational needs that are even outside of sexual needs. And I love teaching guys what these like 4 big buckets are, so they are sophisticated in knowing how to get their needs met. Because if we don't know what those things are, everything feels like we need sex.
Mm.
And even and this is true even for people listening to this will make sense. You know that sometimes when you need something else, and even if you get sex, even if you get that need met, it still doesn't ring the bell as far as how the relationship goes. There's an emptiness, there's something missing. And so we want to think about, like, I always like to think about it like a pie chart, and there's lots of different slices of the pie, and sex is just one of those slices. It's a very important slice, but it's just one of those slices. And we also want to know, what are those other slices? And then kind of the second half of that question is, how do we get this met? Well, outside of the sexual need, all those other slices can be met by other people outside of your wife. Okay, because we're talking about relational needs or emotional needs. And this is where the band of brothers concept becomes very, very important. I have to have key relationships in my life of other men who can meet my relational and emotional needs outside of my wife. Because if I'm putting all of that on my wife, it's putting all my eggs in one basket, and she's naturally going to let me down. She's going to fail me. She's going to disappoint me. It's going to create a lot of conflict. So the sexual need is the only need that she can meet that nobody else can meet, but everybody else can meet all these other needs. Okay. And so, in order to have a high functioning relationship, in order to be a great husband, we got to have a great support network of high quality men in our lives that we can go to and be very open and vulnerable and transparent and talk about life with. Because if we don't have that, it all gets dumped on our wives,
Mm.
and we're going to naturally be very disappointed and let down.
Yeah, and just my, guilt inside your question is, to her, if that's all we're wanting most of the time is sex, then everything we're doing, she's thinking, if we're helping her, or being kind, or we have intentions for sex to be the end product, and then all of a sudden she's gun shy to even ask for help or being involved in anything. And I know when you say the band of brothers, um, having those friends or just not being a lone wolf, I've found has been so impactful because you can lean into uh, a new resource and listen to guys and how they're dealing with it and help each other. I think is super huge. And if guys, want to learn how to do those things, I think going to the church, your local church, is probably one of the simplest ways to find those options, or joining, a local mastermind, or following your page. Like, this is pretty easy to do. I think most guys, if I'm headed to, Exxon's big down here, if I'm headed to the plant, I'm like, Band of Brothers, mastermind. Like, this sounds like stuff that, high level professionals do. How does this even make sense for me? So I think people just need to know where those resources are in their community so that they can just start and just be, you got to have that first bold step just to start it. All right. Our next question, and I have probably 20 to 30% of my group uh, dealing with this somewhat right now, but how do you win your wife's heart back once she has hardened her heart towards you? And then mix in with that, when you talk about that, I know you'll give some encouragement, but what encouragement can you give men who are just trying to show up continually every day in their marriages, but their wife has a hardened heart? She's just become disengaged, and where these guys are probably not seeing the insanity of doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results from them. So how could you help him out and give him a little encouragement?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know it's an impossible place to be, very difficult to feel like your wife is pulling away and to feel like you just don't know what to do to make it better, to change the circumstances. The first thing I would just say is, don't do it alone. Don't do it alone. You got to get help with this stuff, and it's not, whether it's me or 100 other guys out there that can help with this stuff. This stuff is very complicated, believe it or not. This is a very complex relational issue. And chances are, you don't know about this stuff. The only reason someone like me knows about it is because I've spent so much of my life studying it and learning it. But I always tell people, like, if I have a complex, tax problem, I'm going to go to my CPA because I have no idea how to solve that problem. Or this analogy could be applied to anything. It's like, um, so just don't do it alone. There's people out there that can understand it, that can help you. Okay. So that being said, when a wife has hardened her heart, okay, so we could talk about this for a second. It's like, well, why does that happen? And what is really going on there? So this is something really important that I love saying. I think it's important for me to say this. All relationship problems, every single one of them is about fear. It's always about fear.
Mm.
And if your wife has hardened her heart, it means that she's afraid. She's afraid of getting hurt again. She's afraid of trusting you. She's afraid that she'll let you in and nothing will be different. She's afraid. And I don't know exactly what the fear is. And I don't even know that that's really that even, it's not even that important. But what's really important is to be able to look at your wife through that lens of, my wife is terrified. She's afraid. She's not mean. She's not a B word. She's not any of those things. She's just afraid. And when people are afraid, sometimes they act in a certain way that's not pleasant. But below all that, you're just dealing with someone who's tremendously afraid. And so, if you want to get her to open her heart back up, we have to be able to speak into that fear. And we have to be able to be the kind of person when we're around her that makes her feel less afraid. That's how we get her to open back up. And so, most guys don't approach it that way. Most guys think, well, if I buy her flowers, or if I just reassure her that I'm going to be different, or if I, you know, whatever we do behaviorally, it doesn't really move the needle that much because we're not really getting in and speaking to the fear. So we have to learn how to even use language to communicate, like, hey, I know that you're afraid. I know that what I've done has really hurt you and it's caused you to be afraid of me. I want to do everything in my power to make you feel safe, because until she feels safe, she's not going to open her heart. And unfortunately, buying her chocolates and teddy bears and flowers or taking her on vacation will not make her feel safe. It's an apples and oranges problem. So we have to think about, and I always like to use an analogy of, like, if somebody has a daughter, and we talked about that before, Cecil. I
Mm.
think it's like, if somebody has a daughter and your little girl is scared in the middle of the night because she had a bad dream or she thinks there's a boogeyman in the closet, how would you show up with that little girl? Well, your wife needs you to show up in the same exact way: soft, slow, nurturing, warm, empathetic, all of those things. But what happens for most guys, if their wife has pulled back and pulled away, it hits our ego. It hits our ego and it hits our pride. And instead of being soft and nurturing and loving and warm and thinking about how we can make this person feel safe, we sometimes get reactionary and we feel anxious ourselves. And so that anxiety feeds the anxiety. Now, both people are caught in this kind of anxiety storm. Or we get, like, even worse, we can get retaliatory. It's like, oh, you're hardening your heart. Well, I'll harden my heart. And if we think about it from a fear standpoint, that's not going to make somebody feel safe. That's going to make somebody feel more scared. Okay. So if we could just see the relationship through that lens of fear, it would dramatically change how we're showing up in the relationship, because we could ask ourselves a very simple question in all of our interactions: is this going to make her feel safer? I'm writing this long, book of a text message telling her about this and that, right? I can just ask myself, is that going to make her feel safer? Probably not. I'm gonna let her know that if we end up going down this road, that things are going to be really bad for her on the other side of a divorce. kind of like in a threatening way.
Mm.
It's like, is that going to make her feel safer? Okay. And so we always want to just be asking that question. And it's something that I've learned that has been very transformative, even in my own marriage. My wife's not, her she hasn't hardened her heart, and we have a great marriage, but we have conflict. And if she's really ticked off at me, that's the very first question I'm asking myself is, how can I make her feel safer? She's afraid. I've done something that has scared her, and now it's my responsibility to help her feel safer. And that's the only thing that I'll think about. And that's the only thing that I'll do. And that's the thing that will get the relationship back on track.
Mm. And that involves probably a lot of listening, right? On our part?
Yeah, it's like go back to your little girl and she's scared and the boogeyman in the closet in the middle of the night. You're going to go into the room. You're going to say, sit on my lap and I got you. And I'm going to hold you. And you're going to say, oh, tell me about the boogeyman. What did you
Mm,
see? Oh my gosh, that must have been so scary. Oh my gosh. Well, how long were you, how long were you in the room by yourself before you called for me? I was here for 10 minutes and I didn't know what to do. Oh my gosh, that must have been so scary. And then you're just going to stay with it and you're just going to hang out there and you're going to comfort her. And then before you know it, she's going to be like, I'm good, daddy.
yeah,
And then all that fear just, the bottom falls out of it.
deflates.
Yeah.
And you use the exact same question. We probably learned it from somebody along the way, but, when I'm listening to her, my kids, um, men in our group, the tell me more about that, like digging a little bit more and being proactive, not waiting on them to bring in more information, but going ahead and asking them once you're listening, "Hey, well, tell me more about that. Like, why did that make you feel that way?" Or, my wife's name is Sarah. So, Sarah, well, can you tell me more about it so I understand why what I did hurt your feelings? If this has been going on for 4 weeks, like, help me be better at that. How could we have prevented that? How could I have prevented that? Because it's like you said, you can bring all the flowers, chocolate, vacations, but all those are material things. They're not really solid heart type giving items. We've got to take the time to sit down and hold her hand and ask her what's going on. So okay.
I'll tell you a funny story about that real quick. This happened about 6 months ago. I was working with this guy who was having marriage problems and trying to help him and coach him through this process. And he said that, um, he wasn't really bought in completely to the coaching, and he said, you know what, I'm going to take my wife to Paris. I decided because every time we travel together we do really well, and we're going to fly first class to Paris, and we're going to stay 10 days in Paris, and we're going to stay at the nicest hotel. And I just told him, I said, it's a waste of money, but if you might have to learn it yourself, so go ahead. And he calls me from Paris like 4 days into the trip, and he says, "My wife just got on an airplane to come back to the United States."
Oh God.
And I didn't want to, kick a man while he's down, but I'm thinking, well, if there's ever been kind of an "I told you so" moment, this is that
This
chance.
is the most powerful "I told you so" moment ever.
Yeah. So I was like, well, come on back, we'll get back on the horse. We'll get back to where we were going, but it's just a great example of how, like what you said, the material thing, his wife didn't feel safe.
Mm,
And going to Paris wasn't going to help her feel safe. And they probably went to Paris and he probably did more of the unsafe behavior that
yeah.
caused her to feel unsafe in the first place. And then, the rest is history.
Yep, we have those angles. We are the best salesmen when it comes to trying to get what we want, but they know, hey, if I take the bait and I react the way he wants me to by giving me something, I'm just teaching him to do this every time. He'll just keep showing up with teddy bears instead of showing up to talk. Um, our next question is one me and our Pastor Paul that was with us the other night in the mastermind listening to you. One question we met and talked about in an episode, but I did like your spin on it, your value inside the question as well. how do we teach our boys that it's okay to be a man and to be masculine? I did not write this one well, but like where is our masculinity in our house? How can we get it back? How can we grow it? What are the simple ways that you gave us the other night just to cultivate masculinity inside of our households?
Yeah. Well, I feel like, I didn't expect our conversation to kind of be themed this way, but I just feel like there's the theme of our conversation is emotional safety. Okay,
Mm,
because this is very relevant to masculinity and being masculine and being the leader and all those things. Okay. So your wife is going to let you lead to the extent that she feels safe in your leadership.
mm,
And this is a principle across all leadership contexts. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the president of the United States or we're talking about the president of a company. Your people will follow you to the extent that they believe that you have their best interest at heart. Okay, so leadership is a privilege that is earned. It's not a right that's given. And a
mm,
lot of guys see it that way. It's like, well, I'm the man, so I'm the leader. It's like, no, 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 no. Tell me one business that you can walk into where it works that way. Even in the military, it doesn't work that way.
mm,
I mean, there's don't get me wrong, there's some authoritarian leaders in the military, but they know deep down they got to earn the respect of their people, or there's going to be a mutiny. Okay, so it's same thing in our households. I have to make sure that my wife feels really safe, so she lets me lead. And the way that I do that is I show up as somebody who is really caring and attentive to her concerns, her issues, the things that matter to her. And the more that I can embody that way of being with her, she'll happily let me take the lead.
mm,
And it's something that I've earned with her. It wasn't a right that was given to me. And so if and I'm using leadership and kind of masculinity as kind of synonymous terms here because I think, the more safety that we can create in our relationship, the more that we have a free pass to step into that masculine role of being a leader. And also we have to kind of go back to like, understanding, a healthy definition of masculinity is not one that says, I'm the boss. That is not masculinity. That is like little boy, immaturity, tyrant.
mm,
It's like, no, that's not leadership. That's not being a man. Okay. It's like, it's an incredible responsibility to be a leader. And sometimes you realize you don't even want it half the time, but you have to take it because that's your job. And it's a privilege to take on that responsibility. So, masculine in my experience, every single woman, and I know this is a stretch, okay?
mm,
Even the most hardened feminist women crave at a soul level to be led by a safe man. Every single one of them. They crave it because it's in their DNA. It doesn't matter what happened in the 60s and the feminist movement. Let's go back thousands of years. It's in their DNA to be in the presence of a safe man who will lead them and who will look out for them. Every single woman walking the planet desires that.
mhm,
And you know, this is where we just have to look in the mirror. If my wife is not letting me lead well or challenging my leadership or whatever, then I have to look in the mirror and I have to ask myself, who have I been that has created this? Sure, I could blame her and I could say, oh, well, she's just getting influenced by her friends. No,
mm,
because I know that if I show up in the way that I know how to show up, she wants to give me that role. Okay. And so this is where we have to just fall back onto this concept of like safety. If somebody's not letting you lead, it's because they don't feel safe letting you lead. If somebody's not letting you lead, they feel afraid of your leadership. If there's a mutiny, it's because the people on the mutiny don't trust the leader. And it's all fear. It's all fear. So it's like, how how do I create an environment with my sons and with my wife that they feel so safe that they just trust my decisions? And if they challenge my decisions, great. I'll explain it to them. I'll work it through with them. We'll work it out.
Mm.
I'll even allow them to give me input because that takes maturity. That takes growth to be able to do that, right? It's not like my way or the highway, no, no, none of that stuff. That's just like, that's immaturity. Okay. And so we want to be mature men, and we want to see that our leadership will be dependent, our ability to lead our families will be dependent upon how much safety we can create. And when we talk about safety, I know I'm answering, this is a long answer to the question. There's
This
like
is
two
really
sides
good.
to the continuum. Okay. So there's two things that will create unsafety for men: being an authoritarian who basically says it's my way or the highway. That's going to create a lack of safety. The other side of the continuum is being passive and weak. That's going to create a lack of safety. So we have to find that sweet spot in between where we're not just, my way or the highway,
Mm.
and we're not afraid of our wives, like shaking in our boots with anxiety because our wife has an opinion, or our wife is critical, or our wife has, strong beliefs. We can withstand that. We can tolerate that and still step into our leadership and our masculine role. So both of those polarized positions create a sense of fear in our wives, and we have to recognize, which side am I on? I know which side I'm on. If I'm going to err on a side, I'm going to err on being that authoritarian side. But I have lots of friends and lots of clients who are going to err on being the passive side. And so we have to just have an awareness around that. Okay, if I'm erring on being the passive way, I need to work on stepping into that authority and
Mm.
stepping into that strength and making sure that my wife feels safe.
Yeah, I like that. When me and Pastor Paul talked about it, when masculinity equals responsibility, then quit focusing on masculinity and start defining as a dad, as a husband, what things you feel responsible for. And I think with her involved, like, sweetheart, what do you feel like I should be responsible for? And then you have your masculinity answer. Then you can install it back into your household because all of a sudden the leader shows up and he's responsible for the things that you talked about.
Yeah, it's such a great point. Like, I have a client working with right now who is basically like, my wife doesn't trust me with money. I said, okay, cool. Like, tell me, how has money been handled in your relationship? He's like, well, I just make all the money decisions. I said, okay. And like, do you let your wife know? Is she involved? No, because I make the money and she doesn't really know that much about money and she's not that smart about money. And, I was like, well, maybe your wife is smarter than you think. And maybe by doing it so unilaterally, it's kind of scared her. And so maybe if you want to be given that privilege of being the responsible one with money, maybe it would be really good for you to include her in some of the decisions. Like, he was buying investment properties all over the country and she found out about it. She's like, we have houses in Iowa. He's like, oh yeah. And she's like, you never said anything. And he's like, well, don't you just trust me? And it was like, well, now it's like you've scared her.
Yeah.
You've scared her, and so you got to go back to the drawing board. You got to earn her safety, and you got to, and a great way to do that is to involve, like you're saying, Cecil, include her, involve her. That doesn't take away from your masculine power or your leadership qualities to involve her in the decision making process. And if you have a problem with that, that's your own pride and ego getting in the way.
Right. Control and manipulation.
Right.
So, yeah, I agree. Great point. Because I did. I learned so much, when we lost masculinity, we lost it in the garden. Adam was responsible. He lost responsibility when they ate the fruit. So that's when the fall of masculinity started. And I didn't even think of it that way. I just thought it was the macho man power inside the household. I never looked at it as it's actually those very valuable things that we should be doing with our wives. But guess what? Those little people in our household, that's how we're creating our legacy, is by doing those responsible things. so that we're programming. Like you said, we were programmed by our parents as we went into our marriages. That's what we saw. So that's what we thought was supposed to happen. Well, it gives us more responsibility if we take it off of ourselves. And you said something the other night, if you can remember how you said it, but it's not about us and our wives if you make it more about your children and how they're looking at you. Do you remember what that was? It was so strong the way you put it. Um, and I should have put it in my notes today, but the way you put it took it off of me and her and really helped me be more accountable and being more masculine, doing those responsible things because it was my kids that are watching it. So I'm actually affecting an entire generation by not manning up right now and um, taking on the responsibility of what I'm supposed to.
Yeah, that's it's a good point, and it can be applied to a lot of different contexts. But the main idea is that a lot of guys maybe they don't feel motivated to change
Mm,
for their wife's sake because she's a pill and I'm angry at her and I'm frustrated with her, and it's like, well, that's fine. Okay, I mean, we don't want to stay in that place, but it's like our kids are watching,
mm,
and maybe thinking about them as the motivation to change could be enough. Because if we don't, then that that marriage that we're mimicking to them, they're going to have the exact same thing. I mean, the research is very clear on this. It's like our kids will have the same exact thing that we have.
mm.
There's going to be a couple nuances that are going to be different, but that's just window dressing at the very roots of it. From like an attachment perspective, from a love map perspective, our kids are going to get the same thing that we have.
Mm.
And if we don't like what we have and we love our kids, we should be compelled to change that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly how you put it. And don't make it about us, make it about your children. And that makes me just I don't know. I catch wind in my sails. I look at it differently like, yeah, I'm pretty selfish. I need to be more aware of this. All right, our next question. Um, is it more is it is it more important for us as men to hold in what's wrong with us from our wives? Or is it healthier to share and be more vulnerable and open with them? The way it seems that we've been taught is we're the rock, we're the lone wolf, we're the self made warrior. And I think that's why we feel like, well, I'm not going to share those things with her. And then the other night, you led into having a filter on this, not being a little boy that is still trying to live out what you didn't get to in your childhood and sharing those things with her. That's kind of repulsive to her. So, can we dive back into that one
Hmm.
on what's a healthy way to do that?
Yeah. So I think, when it comes to sharing our emotions with our wives, if I was going to put kind of a ratio on it, I would say that um, 85% of women are desperate for their husbands to open up more,
Mm,
craving it, craving it. They pray about it. They're praying about it right now as we speak. God, will you just encourage this man to open up? I want to get to know him better. I want to get to know who he really is. So, most women, the overwhelming majority of women, are desperate for their men to open up. And guys that don't open up were role modeled by their fathers to not open up. And so it's just a paradigm that they have about relationships, that you are strong. And what it means to be strong is to not open up. And opening up and being vulnerable makes them feel weak, and they don't want to feel weak. And so, as a way to not feel weak, we're not going to open up. And then what happens in the relationship is the wife doesn't really know her man. She feels far from him. She feels lonely, therefore, in the relationship, and she starts to detach from him. So, and I say 85%, there's no like data on that, but I'm just,
mm,
spitballing a little bit. That's most women are very desperate for their men to open up. And most most husbands in 2024 came from dads that didn't open up. And then there's the other 15% who are like, I wish my husband would go find a therapist to talk to or get some friends because I'm tired of listening to all of his stuff. Because what he's doing, he's treating his wife kind of like a surrogate mother that he never had, and just kind of vomiting all of his emotional garbage onto her.
Mm,
But it's not for her sake, it's for his sake. Okay, and that's the kind of the key differentiator. And so guys that are in that place, we just want to, and it's like no judgment, but we want to realize that we can't put all of our emotional eggs in that basket. We got to have friends. We got to go find a therapist. We got to find people in our lives that can, shoulder that burden. And your wife can't always be that. And if you find yourself in a relationship where it kind of mimics that, just know that um, it'll really wreck intimacy in a relationship, because what happens, it creates this like little boy and mommy dynamic in a marriage.
mm,
And I always say, no mom wants to have sex with her son. And
yeah.
ultimately, no son wants to have sex with the mom. And so it kills intimacy in a relationship. That's the 15%. But the other 85%, uh, for those guys, we have to reframe what does it mean to be courageous. So this is how I would challenge those guys. I would say, okay, you want to be strong, right? Yeah. Okay. You really pride yourself in being a badass. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay. So if you're really a badass, you could choose whether or not you open up to her or not. And you're just choosing not to. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Okay. So I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you to just spend a week opening up to her and see if you can do it. Because if you really can, you would be able to, right? And it's like boom, that's where they hit the brick wall. And they realize they can't. It's not a choice. It's not like they're being strong. They're actually being weak. They're deferring to their anxiety because they feel so anxious opening up. So this whole like idea of like I'm going to be a strong man, it's like, well, there's actually no strength in not being able to open up. Okay. And so
Mm,
we want to see that for what it is. And again, no shame, no blame, no judgment. But it's like, let's end this belief that you're really strong and you could do it, but you're choosing not to.
mm,
Because if I said, hey, open up, what you're going to feel is you're going to feel your heart rate spike, and you're going to feel your hands start to tremble, and you're going to feel all that fear and anxiety about being vulnerable. And it's going to say, don't do it, don't do it, don't open up. And that's real. The real courage is being able to open up in those moments. That's the ultimate act of bravery. That's the ultimate act of strength. It doesn't take any strength and any bravery to be stoic and shut down. And so it's like I love appealing to our masculine courage. I love appealing to being a badass and being brave. And so if we really believe in those as ideals and those as ethics, then we should be able to open up. We should be able to conquer the fear of being open if we pride ourselves in being a person that's really strong.
yeah. And once they do it once, I mean, then it's the insecurity's gone, the unknown's gone. Then they kind of get to where, you know, I always say a boxer, you get to where you kind of fight better because you understand what to share and what not to share. What is the little boy stuff and what is the grown man stuff? Because one's going to help communication and one's going to hurt communication. So thank you for breaking them in two parts.
Hmm.
All right, let's go to a thicker question. Now, I hope the listeners realize what you've built upon during this conversation is actually going to help answer this question as well. So don't miss all these pieces. I only have two more questions for you. Talk to the man for a minute that has a sexless marriage. How can you give
Mm.
him some options of application and give him hope and maybe open his eyes to, I always tell my sales guys the blinders that you have, you're like a Clydesdale. We're walking and we only see right here, and you are passing up so many things that could affect your performance if you'll just kind of open up and look around and go, man, like there's something over here, there's something over here, and being really, really aware. So what you've built upon today inside your book, all that you teach can help us here. But I just want guys to be really open to this. Take the blinders off and listen to what Quentin has to share with us on this question.
All right. So what do we do if we're in a sexless marriage?
Mm,
Um, and just to define what is a sexless marriage, you're in a marriage where you're having sex um, once a month or less. Okay. So sexless doesn't mean no sex. Once a month is considered a sexless marriage. So we're back to safety again. We're back to safety again. And it's really important to understand the gender differences here. Okay. So men do not need any safety to have sex.
mm,
Sometimes it's important and it feels good from an intimacy standpoint, but we don't need it. We could go have sex with 20 different women today if we were forced to, because that is in our DNA. It's in our biology to be able to do that. Okay. Part of that is thinking about the evolution differences between men and women. If a guy goes and impregnates a woman, he can walk away from that responsibility by and large without any repercussions other than guilt. Okay. So that's not the same for women. Women have evolved as a gender to have grave implications regarding their sexuality. If they get impregnated by the wrong man, it can mean the difference between life and death. Okay, now that's not the case in 2024 because you have the welfare state and you have, women have jobs and all that stuff. But this is only 2024. Women's DNA, the wiring inside their brain, has come from all these years where that wasn't true. If they got impregnated by the wrong guy, it was catastrophic. That's why women have to feel safe in order to have sex. They're not going to go out and just be now. So if some women, the very very small percentage of women could be reckless with their sexuality, but that's a form of like it's a trauma survivor, and there's a lot of abuse history and stuff like that there. But most women have to feel incredibly safe in order to engage sexually. And so if you find yourself in a sexless marriage, it's typically there are some exceptions. I won't even get into the exceptions, but because this applies to 95% of the scenarios, it's typically because the relationship doesn't feel safe. Okay. Now that can be a bitter pill for a lot of guys to swallow because they're frustrated, and they want to be intimate with their wives, and they've tried and they've done all these things to try to make it better and nothing's working, and she can kind of just keep him on ice, and it's a very difficult scenario to be in. And this is where I would say that you don't have a relationship problem, you have an individual problem that is manifesting itself in the relationship. And so we have because my argument would also be because and you might have to just kind of like trust me on this one, okay? But like because I'm privileged to be able to talk to those women, behind the veil, and I can ask them questions like, well, if you got a chance to have sex with the dream guy of your scenario right now, would you want to have? Oh yeah, I would love to have sex with that person. So it's not that women are sexless. Women just want to feel safe in order to have sex. And the partner, the husband that they're with, isn't creating enough safety that is inciting their libido. So the sex is just kind of flat. And then going back to the thing I said earlier, there's two ways to create a lack of safety. There's becoming the kind of authoritarian bulldog, That's not going to get women to open up. And there's the passive, people pleasing little boy. That's not going to get women to open up. So we have to be strong yet nurturing. We have to feel not, we have to be what I call a non anxious presence. We can't be anxious about sex, like desperate, like, oh, like I need to have sex, because there's nothing more off putting to women than someone that's desperate. And so that's why I say it's an individual problem disguised in a relationship, because it's an individual thing within us. We have to become, it's like, my wife won't have sex with me. Okay, great. Now the real work begins. Let's become the kind of guy that she craves, because that is character transformation that's waiting to happen inside you. And until we do that character transformation, then we're going to be, we're going to be in a sexless marriage. Things are going to feel flat. We're going to get addicted to porn. We might even go have an affair at some point. So we always want to bring it back to this concept of like, how am I showing up in a way that's creating a lack of safety for her? Because she's never going to want to have sex if she doesn't feel safe.
Mm.
And it's not just physical safety. That's really important to understand, because a lot of guys are going to hear that and be like, what do you mean nothing's going to happen to her? No, it's emotional safety. Does she feel seen? Does she feel heard? Does she feel cared for? Does she feel nurtured? Does she feel like her wants are just as important as your wants? Because if she doesn't feel those things, she doesn't feel emotionally safe. And it's not gonna get her to open to you to have that enjoyable sexual experience if she's feeling that way. Same thing personally. I'll bring it back to my personal relationship. If my wife is rebuffing sexuality from me, yeah, it is frustrating. I can empathize with that. But I have to go back and have some really hard conversations with myself and just say, how is it that I am showing up that's creating a lack of interest for her? And it's like, if I'm honest with myself and I can really look in the mirror and I can be honest, I'm like, oh yeah, like, I haven't been present with her. For the last 2 days, I haven't really asked her a sincere question about herself. I've been really distracted. Oh, I've been snapping at her because I've been irritable. And I can see all these things that I'm doing that is creating the opposite of safety. So I shouldn't be perplexed that she doesn't really want to have sex with me, because that's a very important gender. I mean, that there is a giant fork in the road between men and women, huge gender difference. Women have to have safety. Men don't have to have safety. And so we have to be able to put ourselves in the mind of the women and say, okay, she needs to feel safe. It's my job to help her feel safe.
Yeah, we've got to get out of ourselves in order for this to work. We've got to think about the person that we're trying to help and how they would want us to respond in order to serve them better. Um, well, the final question will kind of wrap this up, because I know if I was new to listening to something like this or self development just in general, I'm always sitting there going, well, I mean, how do I see? So this is great. I can listen to this podcast over and over and over, but how can I take a next step and start changing the man that I am and start serving my wife and my family, my community? And I think you have right now, to that man listening to this podcast, you have the best resource for him is your book. I mean, it's as easy as it made things flow. And so I didn't talk about it the other night, but I do before we go into your book, the flow, the steps. And do you feel it important, when these guys get this book, to make sure they go from white belt to black belt, not jump around and pick things that they enjoy to grow in, but really hone in and start with your foundation and grow it. Tell me about The assessment, I thought it was kind of funny because some guys took the assessment before we started the class, and they were like, "Well, I'm not even really a husband yet." Some were, some were white belts, some were blue belts, a few purple belts, but it's a cool, simple, fun assessment that you give at the beginning before they even start the book. Can you and I can't imagine what went into making that assessment. It's got to be like loads of hours, but can you talk about the assessment, why that's cool and important, and then jump into your book and why it's important to follow your steps?
Yeah, the assessment kind of just gives people a baseline, read on kind of where they're at,
Mhm.
and it's a self assessment with some questions I ask. So it's pretty simple, but it gives you a sense of like, oh, like some people take the assessment, they're like, oh, I'm already a purple belt. It's like great, you're already a step ahead. Um, the book is the assessment is great, the book is great, but what I want to say is that both of those are just entry points. Okay, both of those are entry points. There isn't anybody walking the earth that had true transformation from reading a book.
Mm,
Okay, because it doesn't happen that way. Maybe except the Bible. Okay. Someone read the Bible and like transformed their life for sure. Okay.
right.
But the point that I'm trying to make is that they're entry points. Okay. The book is an invitation into a calling to go deeper, to go to a place of transformation, a place of healing. And you can't do that in a book. I can't do that in 50,000 words. Okay. Because real transformation only happens in the context of relationships. Okay. So, what the book should do is the book should propel you into a group like you were leading, Cecil. It should propel you into a conversation with your local therapist. It should propel you into a conversation of a life coach that you know, because real transformation can only happen in the context of relationship. Transformation can only happen in the context of relationship. Okay. And so that's the invitation. That's the invitation to us as men. And I think about that in my own life, and I think you'll agree with this, Cecil. Like everything that everything beautiful that has happened in my life has happened in the context of another relationship, whether I've been mentored by somebody or coached by somebody, or
Mm.
and so that's where we really want to go. Okay, that's where we really want to go. And we also want to see that, like, I mean, we're talking about some heavy concepts here. We're talking about stuff like, healing from the past and traumas and our family of origin and things like that. That can't be solved in a book. Okay, and we want to recognize that. Okay, and we don't want to be, we don't want to take a shortcut. We don't want to take a shortcut because as much as I am proud of the book and I love the book, I also know that I don't want people to be deceived that if they read the book, then a miracle is going to happen in their relationship. It won't. Now, that's not meant to be discouraging to anybody. Of course not. It's like, yeah, read the book. And if the book entices you or opens your mind to an idea or it illuminates something about who you are or something important to you, go to the next step. Go develop a relationship with the pastor at the church and start
Mm.
talking to him about it or her about it. Whoever you need to talk to, but it always has to be relational in nature because that's where all the magic happens.
Yeah, yeah. It's the book is gonna create a path for you, but you're gonna have to be bold and take some next steps somewhere. A group, a therapist, your pastor would I think pastors are sitting at churches right now, doing their study for the week, going, "Man, I wish somebody would walk in here that I could help." I mean, a lot of these people are waiting on this. Like you said, our wife is waiting for us to be vulnerable. I wish he would share more. These other people are waiting to help. I get the most fulfilling feeling not out of money. I get it out of helping the next guy, knowing that something I can do to help him become better or take next steps to get him out of that funk or that that trouble he's in. And that's what your book did for me and those guys is go, man, so if I suck over here, I need to hone in and have more awareness or be more masculine to her. Cause I know by doing some of this stuff, it leads to the results that ultimately I want, but results that my kids and my wife want as well. So I appreciate
Mm,
you saying that because
yeah.
you're not just sitting back going, um, "Hey, go grab my book," and boom. I meant to snap right here because of that Disney effect. Like some of those guys go, "Well, this didn't do anything," and they do that cop out all the time. I've tried this before; it doesn't work. I've tried this one thing before. She's just different. And it's because they weren't consistent for long enough to really give it a chance to have an effect on their marriage. It's just it's not gonna happen overnight. Nothing good does.
Yeah, yeah, nothing good does, and, as guys, and I'm just like this too. We all want a very simple three-step formula, just show me the 3 things, to and unfortunately, when it comes to this stuff, that doesn't work, okay? Because this stuff, it has so many complexities.
Yeah.
And something that I'm just such an advocate for, and I hope this doesn't come out the wrong way, but like, you know, our the way that we spend our money is a testament to what we value. And it's like put your money where your mouth is. If this stuff is important to you, go spend money on it. And this is not a sales pitch about me. Don't hire me, go hire somebody else. And if you don't have any money, there's free low-cost counseling clinics all over the country that would be more than happy to see you.
Yep.
So go put your money where your mouth is. Go spend your time. Don't tell me that this is important to you, and then also tell me in the same sentence that you're not gonna you're not willing to pay for help and you're not willing to spend time for help. Because then I'm just gonna call you a person that doesn't have integrity. Because if you have integrity, the way that you spend your money will align with your values. And if your marriage is off kilter, you should really consider spending money to make it better. And even if it's not off kilter, I still think you should spend money to make it better because there's something potentially incredible waiting for you. So, I just say that because it's like, we're guys listening to this and the guys will relate to that. You know, I'm sure Cecil, as a business owner, you can relate to that as a principal so well. And the same thing applies to our relationship. Like I'll meet people and I'll say, oh, you know, my wife left me, and I'll do anything to get her back. Okay, great. This is what it's going to cost to work together. Oh, well, I'm not going to do that. Well, then it's like it's not that important to you. So, like, I would rather have you just look me in the eyes and say that it's not important than to play this, like,
Mhm.
charade, this game and say, "Oh, it's so important, but I'm not really willing to spend time or money," because then it's just not important,
Yeah.
and I hope that doesn't land on anybody as judgmental or self-righteous because that's not where I'm coming from, but I'm also wanting to challenge people and say that, you know, in life, there's a very good truism. We spend money on things that are important to us. That's it.
Yeah. And in relation to that, if you're looking at that fella and he's telling you that, I'm a shoe guy. Are you a shoe guy? You like shoes?
Yeah, I love shoes too. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so this is easy for me and you. If we're looking at each other and Quentin's telling me that, I'm gonna look down at your Jordans or your Blazers, and I'm gonna go, well, look, man, honestly, what you're spending on some of your tennis shoes is more than you would spend for an hour with a business coach or a life coach in most cases. So maybe looking in Cecil's closet and going, there's 50 pairs of Nikes in here. Maybe I just need to go, oh my gosh, you're right. That's what I think about that. Why wouldn't I think about this intentional time with Quentin? And we can talk how they have access to you. I think that's a good segue into us wrapping up. But I also, and I can't thank you enough for today, for the Zoom call you did with us, for what you're doing for men and women everywhere. Because in the end, they benefit from it if we get better. But can you tell our listeners how they can find your book, your podcast, the resources that you have as far as coaching online? And then also I want to talk about your new book a little bit. Who's it for and when it releases as well?
Yeah, the best way to thank you, Cecil. The best way to if you guys want to get in touch with me or if there's anything I can do to support any of you listeners, the best way to do that is just go to quentinhafner.com. And then so that has everything to find me there, including my podcast. And then if you want to follow me at Black Belt Husbands on Instagram, that's where I'm posting a lot of content and videos and things there. And then release date for the new book is looking around March 15th ish,
Mm.
March 21st, third week in March. And the new book is called Go Next Level. And who is this book for? This book is for anybody who wants to go to the next level in life or in business, whether it's, you want to take your business to the next level, you want to take your marriage to the next level. The premise of the book is in life, all of us get stuck on plateaus, and we can live a pretty good life even on a plateau. But if we want to live a really great life, we have to know how to get off that plateau.
Mm.
And so the book is a blueprint on how to get off the plateau anywhere in your life: health, fitness, marriage, making money, and how to go to whole new levels in your life.
And will the on the 15th, just because I'm a listener, I know most guys, even it's a good point. Like, even when I tell guys, go get this book, they just like deflate, like, I don't have time to
Yeah,
read. And I've got to be
sure.
very clear with my second statement is, listen, you can go get the book, but me personally, I don't have a lot of time to read either. I don't go over it's helpful to, read the book while you're listening to it. That's not the time to do that. But I tell them, why don't I send you, the one from Apple or whichever their Android listeners listen on, but listening to the book while they're at the gym, while they're working around the house, those types of things allow them to go, oh, I got a 30-minute commute in the morning. I could consume some of Quentin's book. So will the audio version be available on the 15th as well?
Yep, I'm recording it right now. I'm recording it right now as we speak. So yeah, you can get Black Belt Husband on Audible on through Amazon, and then you're going to be able to get Go Next Level on Audible too. So you can listen to it or read it.
Well, very cool.
Yeah,
Well, man, I've enjoyed this so much. I hope if
me
it just
too. Good
helps,
chat.
yeah, one person out there, I'm grateful. So, well, guys, as always, thank you for listening and watching our show. Please make sure to give us a good review so other listeners can see us out there. Go share us on any of your preferred social media, Instagram, Facebook. You can find our podcast on any podcast platform by searching at Like Minded Servants. So until next time, let's go serve someone today so we all get better together.